Good morning and a very warm welcome back to day 2 of the International IP Enforcement Summit on behalf of our hosts. Jesus, I don't believe it. On behalf of our hosts, the Swedish Intellectual Property Office, PRV, the European Commission, and the European Union Intellectual Property Office, EU IPO. My name is Jackie Davis. I will have the privilege of moderating all our plenary discussions this morning as we continue to consider how best to strengthen cooperation between rights holders, intermediaries, and enforcers to counter IPR infringements. Housekeeping before we start. The agenda and list of participants, just to remind you, are available in what we call the main hall. At the bottom of your screen, click on the Q&A button to send your questions to our speakers, the Q&A button, and please could I ask you to be as brief as possible so I can see at a glance what you want to know and who your question is to. And click on the chat button if you want to see or join in the group conversations. If you want to tweet out, send out that IPR infringement cooperation message to a wider world, and we do encourage you to do so, please use the hashtag IPSummit21. There are parallel breakout sessions again this morning as yesterday, and the link and password to access the session you selected during registration will be made available shortly before the session in the main hall. The connection links were also sent to your mailbox. Also, just to remind you that any personal data related to the organization of this meeting is handled in accordance with EU regulation, and the conference is being recorded by the EU IPO, and the recording of the plenaries will be put on the website later on today. So, the OECD EU IPO joint study launched yesterday painted what was described as an alarming picture and underlined the scale of the challenge we are facing to counter counterfeiting and piracy. On the upside, speakers highlighted how much progress has been made since the first IP forum and stressed that now is, and I quote, a moment of opportunity to work together for the common good, as Christian Archambault put it. But Peter Strömbeck warned that we must not waste this chance. And Peter Meyer said, results are vital to show that the decision to put IP crime back on the list of priorities for tackling serious and organized crime under the impact framework was a good and wise one. We are not at the end, we are just at the beginning, as both he and Jorge Bento Silva emphasized. All speakers agreed on the importance of the topic we're discussing here, strengthening cooperation and collaboration, saying it's essential to deliver those results, and that this goes hand in hand with regulation. And Kerstin Jorna reminded us that this is a pivotal moment for innovation. And we heard that effective IPR enforcement is absolutely vital if we are to foster the private sector investments in innovative new technologies, not least in the area of sustainability and the green transition that we discussed in our panel yesterday afternoon. And speaker after speaker also stressed the need for agility to adapt to a constantly and rapidly changing landscape, which brings us to the topic of our panel this morning. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to focus in this session on new technology for IP enforcement online. The European Commission has launched an industrial dialogue to assess the impact of new technologies on the IP system under its IP action plan. So what we want to consider, what challenges do digital and technological transformations pose to IP protection? How are the infringers exploiting the technologies? And on the upside, how can tools like artificial intelligence and blockchain be used to improve IP enforcement? Joining me to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Charles Nick Slingsby, who is International Legal Director at Twitch, part of Amazon. He'll tell you more about Twitch in a moment. Michael Lund, Security Manager at Nordic Content Protection, and Matt Cope, Deputy Director, IP Enforcement at the UK IPO. So a very warm welcome to all of you. Let's jump straight in. I have some questions to our panel, but please your questions, your comments. Use the Q&A box. We really want to hear from you. So Charles, perhaps I could start with you. In terms of the challenges and opportunities, when we're talking about new technologies, we're talking both, aren't we? New ways they're being used by the infringers and new ways they can be used by you, by other companies to protect yourselves. How do you see that balance?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you, Jackie. Just to give a brief introduction to Twitch. Twitch is a live streaming and video on demand service, which has up to about 200 million users a month. At any given time, there are about 30 million live streams happening. And so we deal firsthand with piracy and also the technologies that we seek to combat them. And I think when we talk about new technologies, there are a couple of constants here. The first is what type of media content are we talking about? And it's always going to be images, text, music, and video. Then there are the transmission constants. It is either going to be video on demand or live streaming. On the video on demand side, we have technologies in place such as watermarking, which we can use. The real challenge is live streaming because of the ephemeral nature of that content. And something that we can discuss a little bit later on is how it is easier to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to tackle the behaviors behind the infringement, as opposed to monitoring the actual audiovisual content in itself. And AI will never be the entire solution to this. It always needs to be balanced with human review to protect freedom of speech safeguards.
Thank you very much indeed. And that balance, as you say, between what the technology can do and the human element in all of this, and where the technology can help most, something very much like to come back to later on. Michael, from your perspective, the challenges, the opportunities, how do you see this broadly?
I think one of the main challenges that, from a very top perspective, is that the infringers themselves have already the agility that enforcers seek. So the infringers have the luxury of seeing developments of new technologies, very quickly viewing whether it can add or perhaps even sustain their already criminal activities, and then they can just adapt them if it works. They can even test it, probably risk-free, see whether or not it enhances whatever it is that they are doing, and then they can adopt it, often at very low cost. So as we seek to do the same to protect and enforce, we have to acknowledge the ever lasting situation of criminals running in front of enforcement and playing the catch-up game. So I think that's the main challenge, not only because it's not necessarily sparkling new technologies that's in the mix here. It's also existing technologies becoming more available, both in terms of quality, but also in terms of affordability. And that allows the criminals to raise their quality of products to get very close to the legal offerings, which is a challenge. And of course, opportunity-wise for us as enforcers, we can benefit from this as well. We need to do it agile, and we need to do it in a very fast way. But AI, automation, things like that is certainly already being used widely to make the gap between the front-running criminals and the enforcers more or less.
So already being used. Question is, are we exploiting its potential to the full? But lots to come back to a little bit later on. Matt, complete the picture for us in how you see the challenge here, but also the opportunity.
Well, I certainly don't disagree with anything that Charles or Michael have already said. I think, to state the obvious in broad terms, new technologies cause headaches for IP protection in two main ways for me. They allow new types of infringement to happen. So think 3D printing or IPTV streaming when that came on the scene, or they allow infringement to happen at a scale previously not seen. So the rise in e-commerce, especially over the last year or so, or growth of user-generated content on social media, that kind of thing. And this presents challenges, especially for government. Michael mentioned how fast the infringers develop their business models, and governments are not known for being particularly quick on their feet. And it's a challenge because existing legislation might not always work particularly easily when it's applied to technology that wasn't even dreamt of when the law was originally drafted. But those technologies do offer us some solutions as well. We've sort of mentioned AI, filtering software, track and trace markers for physical goods. But there's also some really interesting collateral effects in that the technology itself has changed the way that infringers do business. I'm thinking of things like the visibility of counterfeiters plying their trade online is much greater than the old days of dodgy market stalls and backstreet shops. You know, they need their shop window open to the world, and that gives us opportunities to access that data and gives us greater leverage. So we've got that data and reach. How do we use that to effectively tackle illicit behavior? That's the interesting thread for me, I think.
Thank you very much indeed. So very much there, a balance of challenge and opportunity. Let me bring in at this point Mark Lichtenhein, chairman of the Sports Rights Owners Coalition, which represents international and national sports bodies, competition organizers. Mark, how do you see the challenge?
Well, thanks, Jackie. I think, you know, as Charles said, you know, we have a lot of technology at our disposal, things like watermarking, fingerprinting. You know, we have the ability to have the sort of DNA equivalent of knowing what our content is. And that's really a question now, I think, of making some of the things that were mentioned yesterday really work, particularly the efficacy of notification and takedown. If we can surgically remove with technology the infringing content at its source, and bearing in mind that the streaming is actually done by a relatively small number of very large-scale streaming services, you know, we can make a huge step forward. As Benjamin said yesterday, you know, time is of the essence. Sport content is only live once. And if we can't take things down quickly, and I mean, by that, I mean like within 30 minutes, the value is lost. Judgments, legal remedies can't take place in that time frame. So what we really need is a definition of this cloudy word, expeditious. Content should be removed expeditiously. We think that should be 30 minutes. There is legal precedent for this in the Netherlands, in the Ecotel case. Recently, the judge determined that expeditious meant 30 minutes. We think that's a very reasonable thing that could easily be adopted in something like the DSA as we move forward. You know, we have a situation, the European Parliament has delivered a report on the piracy of live sport broadcast, asked the Commission to act. We think that the ability to take down content, or the requirement to take it down within 30 minutes would be a huge step forward. And if we can increase the efficacy of notification and takedown, you know, we already work, sports rights owners, with a lot of platforms who provide the tools for us to take down that content expeditiously. That would be another step forward to actually solve part of the problem.
Thank you very much indeed. And there, that cooperation, that collaboration between you and the platform is absolutely crucial. But I'm struck when you talk there about expeditiously taking it down. I wanted to come back a bit later on the comment that Charles made at the beginning about, he said it's easier to use it to tackle the behaviors behind the infringement than it is the monitoring of the content. So I'd like to come back on what that means, and particularly in that context of the challenges Mark and his members face. But just in terms of whether we have enough, first of all, enough awareness among businesses, among IP enforcers, and are we keeping pace in understanding? You said, Michael, it's a catch-up game, but are we keeping pace in being aware of these new business models, of how they're using the technologies, in order then to use the technologies to respond to that? Do you think we need more awareness in the business community and among enforcers and intermediaries of precisely what's happening? Do we know enough?
I think we know enough, but I think we know enough in small silos. So I think for example, we work with the Nordic television industry, and we try to really stay on the front lines of how the illegal products are working, and that teaches us, of course, every little detail about how does criminals nowadays accept payments, and how do they deliver the product, and how is the product then quality wise, and how are they able to actually achieve, sadly, a next level quality, even though it's illegal what they do. So we know exactly how they operate. We can pinpoint the technologies they use, and we see, like, this is what I mentioned, that going back a couple of years, an illegal IPTV provider would be able to service perhaps 100 or even 500 customers at the max. Then the capacity wouldn't be there for him to accept more customers. And this is what we've seen in terms of existing streaming technology becoming more widely available and affordable. So now this kind of criminal will be able to serve perhaps 5,000 or 50,000 customers at once, because he's now able to use content delivery networks and major streaming platforms.
Yeah, so to that point Matt made about it's not just new types of infringement, it's the scale on which it's happening. Matt, do you feel, Michael saying we know a lot about what's happening, but it's in silos, we need to bring it together. Would you agree with that? And if we need to break down those silos, how do we do that? And then I'll come on to the positives of all this technology after we've dealt with this. Matt?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. From my experience, industry tend to be really good at identifying these threats. I speak to people in different areas of business, and they are generally very expert at what's going on in their individual areas. The challenge is joining that up, both within industry itself and within government, because I speak to different people in different parts of the enforcement framework. I think there's a lot more we could be doing in terms of partnership working. We've had some great successes over the past few years, getting people in the same room and having some honest conversations. But to really get that voluntary cooperation to work, you need much more free sharing of information between businesses and between business and government. And we've always had the sort of spectre of competition issues getting in the way and things like that. And I think that's something that we really need to grasp in order to have those honest conversations and really work together, because people have the answers to this stuff, but not always the people with the problems. So we need to be much more free in sharing with each other.
And as you say, and it was made, a point was made by one of our speakers yesterday in terms of this isn't a competitiveness issue. This is businesses need to work together. Some do, some don't, but it's challenging. Charles, complete the picture for us in terms of your sense of how good we are at knowing what the new challenge is, what they're up to, what the business model is, and how they're using the technology, and whether we need to do more to raise awareness of the links between what they're doing in one sector and what they're doing in another.
I think we can always do more, but I don't actually think that is the principal challenge for us here. We are certainly on the industry side very aware of how our technologies are being exploited. We can see the patterns. What we face now are logistical hurdles. We need mandated common standards for the watermarking. We need to have essentially a source of truth in order to match what is being streamed up against the rights holders' library, so that we can essentially check that and then take it down. We need greater visibility over things such as sports calendars, so that we can actually coincide our human monitoring with when the peak times are, in the sense that it's surge monitoring, and that will help to expedite notice and take down. These teams, they're very costly. You don't want to run them 24/7. However, if we know that Premier League football is happening at X time, or Indian cricket is happening at Y time, and we also know which teams are playing, then you can start kind of actually blocking very simply combinations of words. So we say Liverpool versus Barcelona blocked on Saturday night then you prohibit the discovery of these streams. And that is a very low-hanging fruit. However, in order to balance that with human rights, freedom of speech concerns, we'd want to time limit that, because it could otherwise just be Liverpudlians who want to visit Barcelona and share some tourism tips. So in that sense, the cooperation now is the final hurdle. The technology is very much in place, although we can refine it.
Thank you very much. And please do get your questions coming in to our panel. Matt, you talked in answer to my first question about, and you mentioned a number of different technologies that are available in terms of we're turning the coin now to the opportunities that new technology brings us. I just wonder where you see the most potential, which will be most useful, and can you give us some examples of ways? I mean, we heard there Charles outlining some key challenges as he sees them that need to be addressed. What types of which bits of technology do you think are most useful, and how?
It's a really difficult question to answer. I think all of the technologies we've mentioned so far offer some help. AI and machine learning probably for me is the most exciting area. It's something we're looking at the IPO. We're doing some research into both the potential challenges it throws up in terms of IP protection, and also how it might be useful to us in the rights granting space as well as the enforcement space. But I think for me the important thing is that it can't work in a vacuum. Infringement's never going to be stopped by a new RFID tag or a blockchain shipping manifest. We need the technological tools to be working within a whole system where we're working to reduce demand, we're educating consumers, people are sharing responsibility along the supply chain, as well as people like enforcement agencies pursuing the serious criminals where that's appropriate to do so. When all of that's working together, that's when the technology really starts to deliver rewards for me. So I wouldn't want to pick a champion in that sense. I think they all have their place, but they have to be part of a whole system approach.
It's that ecosystem that you need, that they are within. Could I come back, Michael, to something you said earlier when you talked about how these technologies can be used, and I wonder if you could explain a bit more what you meant when you said that it's easier to use AI, machine learning, to tackle behaviors behind the infringement. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that we're seeing infringements on a large scale. Sometimes it's hundreds or thousands of websites, committing infringements against right holders. That might be websites selling counterfeit clothes or shoes, but it could also be websites like I deal with on a daily basis, selling access to illegal IPTV. And the problem is that if you just go ahead manually and you start searching for these sites containing counterfeit products of your brand or whatever, you won't get anywhere, because you will only see the top of the iceberg, so to say. And that you can potentially remove that, but it doesn't really hurt the illegal business model, because there will be several others taking over. So what you need to do is you need to automate things. You need to have automated content recognition. You need to tell an algorithm or an AI what it is you're looking for, and then have it run and do all the hard work. Then you tell it, after it's harvested all of this data, then you have it learn what you want to see. What is then vital to you? What is the major threat that I want to go for? And then eventually, when you get really good at this, you'll be able to see the patterns. And that's where we are right now. We manually then have a go at those patterns. Some of it is automated, but what it essentially brings us to have a view into is who is behind. So who are the major operators behind this? Who are the groups or individuals that is actually making a lot of money from these infringements? And that is where we in Nordic Content Protection work, and that's where we think everybody in this landscape should work, because then we can pinpoint where the money flows, and that's where we need to have our intervention and remove that group or those products, because then the whole ecosystem, the whole illegal ecosystem falls apart.
Thank you very much. Charles, in terms of what has the most promise. Very struck there, Michael, saying if you ask it the right, you've got to ask it the right questions and tell it what it is you want to know. Where do you see the most potential in these technologies? And do you agree with Michael's analysis of what it can be used for and what it can't be used for, as it were? How you need to use it?
Yeah, very much so. I think Michael's exactly highlights the opportunities and the challenges there. The AI targets the metadata surrounding these behaviors. So if I use the example of live streaming of sports, essentially what the metadata or what the AI is looking for is users who have no track record going to a large amount of viewers in a very short period of time. That narrows down from established streamers. So you can say this is a new streamer here. Then you add in even more data. You say, does the username of the streamer, does it have sequential numbers, a key trait of infringers? Does it have a username which matches something that has been banned beforehand? All of that adds to the mix. And we are trialing proactive software in order to do so, in order for us to increase the efficacy of that, because we're here casting a very wide net, and then that wide net needs to go through manual review. And that is where we run up against the expeditiously challenge. How do we kind of increase the speed of notice and takedown on that basis? So we need even more data for the algorithm to learn. And that's where I was referencing previously cooperation with rights holders as to sports calendars or so on, which would even further help refine what we're trying to search for. And I think that is really the next challenge. And once we get to that point, we have got a much better machine learning model, which can help to essentially filter down the amount of content which requires human review. And then we're really talking about an effective product.
Thank you. If I might, Mark, could I bring you back in at this point? Just because whether you think what Charles is talking about there, you were talking about, we really need, the value is gone if we don't react fast enough. Do you think he has a point here? How do you see asking the right questions of this technology, this timing issue? Do you think this is the approach that will work?
Look, I think, give some context here. I mean, I think we know pretty much now where this piracy is happening. What we're not able to do is to stop it. Now, we have great collaboration with the big platforms, but if you're a pirate, if you're a serious pirate, you're not going to work with the platforms that are collaborating with the rights holders. You're going to work with different ones that are uncollaborative. That's the nature of your business. We reckon there are around 200 service providers in Europe that have the capacity to deliver streams at scale to feed these pirate sites. Most of them are very good actors. They work collaboratively with us. But those that don't, those are the problem ones. They don't react to notice and takedown. So there either needs to be an obligation on those platforms to react within, or to work with us to take down that content, or to react within 30 minutes, as I said. So I think a lot of the quantification of the problem is there, but to give some perspective, you know, the illegal streaming market is reckoned to be worth half of the legal streaming market. You know, $28 billion of piracy business right now in audiovisual. And as I say, you know, sports content is live. That's the value of the sports content. It's only live once, and once that value has been taken away, there's no return. So, of course, all these, you know, AI technologies are going to be very useful in the discovery process. But I do believe we have a lot of discovery in place. Now we just need to act.
Thank you very much. Matt, we haven't talked about blockchain and the role that blockchain can play in authenticating, because of course we were talking yesterday as well about global supply chains and how do people, we were talking about it in the context of sustainability investments, but how do you make sure counterfeits are not in your supply chain? The role of blockchain in all of this, are we using it as effectively? And then I want to come on to business and the support that business needs to use all of these tools. But could you say 2 words about blockchain?
Yeah, I think blockchain is a really interesting technology, but it suffers, there's great potential there, obviously, but it suffers from the same problem that a lot of track and trace technology does, which is that it needs somebody to care at the end point of sale. We know that for some types of counterfeit goods, up to 80% of consumers know they're buying a counterfeit. Blockchain shipping manifests are not going to help you there, because the end point of sale doesn't care and the consumer doesn't care. Customs authorities,
the business that's getting parts, for example, might care, does care.
Yes, exactly. And in situations where people are paying that attention to the provenance of goods, absolutely, I see it as being a really.
But someone has to be paying attention. Someone has to think it matters.
Yeah, and that sort of reads on to the fact that customs can only check a small percentage of goods that are coming in. Where is the check? Where is the person who's actually going to validate the goods? You need to build that into the system. So blockchain on its own doesn't work. You need a supply chain that comes through that validation step at the end, and where somebody pays some attention to the goods.
Keep coming back to that human element in all of this. The technology alone doesn't solve it. Michael, a thought on blockchain?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Matt. It's promising technology, definitely, and it's being looked at vigorously across many industries, and definitely, for example, within the music industry, which also suffers, of course, with copyright violations. There are several projects ongoing, looking at different ways of rights management, royalty payouts, connecting to delivery of music, of content. And I think, personally, it would be a positive if the television industry would at least have a look at this and consider whether there should be, not short term. I don't think there is the potential to actually bring it in on large scale, but potentially it could be the underlying technology that eventually you will have access to more or less everything you want legally, and then an underlying global right management system that might be based on blockchain.
Because we do know from surveys that people are much less likely to access illegal content if the legal offer is there and easily accessible. Charles, Rolf, do you see a key role for blockchain here?
I wouldn't say it's key. I would say, look, we look at a smorgasbord of options here, and it's a big problem, and we take the marginal gains where we can. Certainly, everything will help to tackle certain individual problems and to narrow the behaviors and once we put this whole cocktail together, then we have a suite of answers to these kind of particular problems. The real challenge, I think, is coming to essentially a global source of truth here, with mandating the common standards, an easily accessible format for rights holders and intermediaries to essentially share the information, to match the information. So I very much see it as that logistical hurdle that is kind of preventing us really making a big step here.
Thank you. And that brings me really to the tools that are needed. We were talking yesterday about the EU IPO enforcement portal, which is a platform for sharing data and information, but also the EU IPO has produced an anti-counterfeiting technology guide. They plan to make it interactive for businesses to help them choose from, I like this word, the smorgasbord of things that are out there, the electronic identification, the tracking and tracing devices, the markers, all of those things. I mean, this isn't easy for a business. Charles, let me stay with you for a minute. There are all these tools. They have variable uses and different, obviously, for different sectors. Do you think businesses need more support, more help, in order to know which tools are appropriate for them to use and how best to use them? And how do you see the role of this guide and other such initiatives in that? Charles first.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, to build you might be able to buy the tool off the shelf, but then you have to integrate it in your particular service. To do so, it requires lead times. We're currently leanly staffed. It's in the middle of a pandemic. You have to go out, you have to hire those people. That you have to estimate is 3 to 6 months. Then you have to find space on your tech roadmap. You have to budget for this. You have to prioritize at the expense of something else. You're talking another 6 to 9 months. Then you need to make sure that you've actually chosen the right piece of technology to essentially put all of that big bet on. Right. And you don't want to find that the market has moved on, or that somebody else is mandating another technology. You essentially don't want to have saved up all your pocket money to buy a Betamax video recorder. That is the challenge for us. And again, here we've talked about the challenges on time and money, and then narrowing down what is the right approach to do so. And in a sense, when you get to the smorgasbord, it all looks very tasty. You've only got one go at this and only one plate. What you put on. And I think that is really where we could get help from the government, because we don't want to essentially load it up our plate and then be told, look, actually best efforts means something else. This technology that somebody has sold with very glowing terms actually doesn't do what it says on the tin. And that is that there needs to be some kind of tolerance there, and also guidance. And that would really help take up.
But Michael, listening to Charles there, and that process that a company has to go through of selecting, I love his smorgasbord analogy, but selecting from it, making sure, applying it, making sure it was the right tool, etc. And you said, in answer to my first question, you underlined how agile, how fast we have to be. What more can be done to support businesses in this process? And I see, ladies and gentlemen, we do have one question in from the audience, which I'll put to our panel in a minute. If there are any more, please keep them coming. Michael.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement. And I think along the lines of the anti-counterfeiting guide, which will work even better if it becomes a virtual tool, that could be an anti-online piracy guide. So a place for businesses which perhaps don't have experience with enforcement can go and have a browse through and learn, is it a website that's infringing? These are the details you will be trying to identify, and this will be the format you want to go for if you want to report it to authorities. Then you have to keep in mind these details have to be in the complaint, and this is how authorities usually will help you, and so on. So this will be able to guide the businesses into simply creating a real complaint that can be handled in a timely manner, and where there is an anticipation of success in terms of enforcement.
And Matt, I'm thinking, listening to Michael, of course, we're talking also about, in a lot of cases, about SMEs, that smaller, innovative, agile startups. They don't have the resource for this on top of everything else that they're trying, their own innovations. Do you think, and I don't know what you do to try and support business in this, but particularly SMEs, do we need to do more?
I think we always need to do more. SMEs really have the odds stacked against them. This stuff is expensive to do, it's complicated to do, they need to buy in expertise to do it. One thing we've done previously in the UK is publish a supply chain toolkit to try and to kind of cover off that so what element. Sticking a holographic label on it is good, but without the knowledge and the understanding of how the whole supply chain works and how you secure that, it doesn't actually get you anywhere. I think trade bodies have a role to play here. Government has a role to play here, and also that sort of cooperation between the different people in the supply chain, the different intermediaries. If we're all working together to try and achieve the same ambition, we should be able to help each other along the way. But yeah, my sympathies for SMEs, especially in this.
Michael, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, because EU IPO actually back in 2019, when they released a report on illegal IPTV, they produced a very detailed best practices of investigations that was focused on law enforcement, which was really, really detailed and really, really good. You could actually take that model and then convert it into more bulletin points style, and that would, for example, if a television company would want to have a go at reporting something, the bullets from that report more or less highlights everything that they should be looking for before moving on.
Thank you very much. Question from Harriet Lassen from Lego. Do we not need more transparency on the internet? A KYC, know your customer requirement. She says GDPR has made it even more easy for bad actors to hide their identity in order to improve chances to get to the source. So in other words, does the available technology actually help rights holders to identify the bad actors? Michael's shaking his head. I'll come straight back to you then.
No, definitely. The domain name registration is something that has a history, and but only very few registries, top-level domain registries around the world actually do KYC or do any form of verification of identity when registering a domain name. So there is a few, and those are actually exemplary, and a lot of attention is going to them, but most throughout history, you could just put, when you register a domain name, you could just put Santa Claus or whatever, and a fake email address, and so it's never really worked. So I totally agree that that should be a tool available when you see your rights being infringed, because that should be what you want to do, is just get on the phone, call them, ask them to stop. That should be the first step. Right, but that has never worked.
Yeah, domain names an issue we're going to go into in one of the breakouts in a little while. Does anybody else want to comment on that before we move on? I just wondered, and it's a much broader question here, but one I would like to ask about the relationship between the physical world and the online world, the off and online world. And we're in a situation now where these two worlds are merging. Do you think, Matt, that the approach is very different when we're talking about the online world, or are the principles underpinning how we tackle these issues, are they basically the same, or is it very different?
I mean, the principles are basically the same. There's people responsible for this activity. If you can identify them and you pursue them through whatever court of law happens to be local to them. I think that the challenges are the internationalism, the layers of technology, as we've just heard, can obscure exactly who those people are. Although, on the other hand, they are also visible to the public in a way they weren't previously. So it is a different way of doing business. It's more the sort of scale and the distance which is involved, and that means much more international cooperation. There's almost no minor act of counterfeiting that doesn't cross some border. It's all transnational crime now, which is something that takes a different toolkit to approach and a different approach to cooperation.
But I was struck yesterday, Charles, by something that was said by one of our panelists in the seed sector about their big problem was courts that don't have the knowledge to understand precisely what is happening in these cases of IPM. This was in the case of plant variety. She said, we need more specialized courts. And Morgan Johansson was saying yesterday in his opening, that's one of the things that Sweden has done, specialized courts, judicial authorities with the knowledge to deal with these issues. Do you think, as we talk about these new technologies, how they're being used, what you uncover through them, do we have the knowledge, or is there more training needed of enforcers, of judicial authorities about these new technologies and about the challenges that the online world poses, and as Matt was saying, similar principles but very different challenges?
Very much so. I think there is a kind of a knowledge gap in the specialization here, which is the ultimate kind of challenge for the enforcement side. I think, when we have been talking previously about what are the low-hanging fruit here, where can we inject friction into the process for infringers so that we make this untenable for them. The upside of that is that we take them off the big platforms. The downside is that we push them kind of further into the darkness of the internet. Again, anything which has an enforcement angle to it, we are talking months or years before an ultimate decision. For things such as sports rights, time is of the essence. So you can't really think about solving the problem with that. It could be a bunch of actually quite small, agile, bad actors, as opposed to a wider network. So I think specialization in the judiciary is welcome. That is the way that we are going in a digital 21st century. I think it would be helpful across a whole range of issues, not just IP infringement, even when we talk about online harms and the dangers of CSAM, which absolutely we need to kind of have that knowledge in order to see through. On IP infringement, and specifically on the kind of the sports side, we are moving at such a quick pace that the focus really for solutions just needs to be preventing it in the here and now.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, did you want to add anything on this? And then I want to come to the question of partnership. You're muted, Michael. It's inevitable. It always happens at least once.
Yeah, I had a child.
I know, don't worry,
right
don't worry.
Yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to also say that specialization, of course, like was mentioned, is key. But I also just wanted to get back to what Mark said with these hostile services, as we call them. These are the ones that don't respect our notice and takedowns and don't react to being told what infringements goes on their service or on their platform. And one of the things that could definitely be handled is, as we try to attack these within EU, within Europe, we will definitely just see them moving outside of Europe. So we need to be prepared for that. So that's one of the things that we'll hopefully be able to put in towards the end here is what do we want from the toolbox? And one of the things, if we don't get to it, is definitely let's prepare for when suddenly the bad actors or the hostile services, they now find themselves in parts of the world where we have difficulties reaching. So that could definitely be a problem.
Absolutely. We will come back to the toolbox before we close. And that links, I think, very much something to our speaker from the OECD was saying yesterday about the challenge is global, but the tools are not. And how do we reconcile those two things? I just wanted to come back on the issue of partnership. And this event is all about strengthening cooperation, collaboration. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Peter Mayer said yesterday, we cannot do this. The only way to deliver results is cooperation, collaboration. Yes, regulation has a part to play. And I think Mark was pointing to that in terms of what the rules, how clear they are, the definitions and so on. But without cooperation, collaboration, none of this can happen. For each of you, and based on your experience, and I'll come from an industry perspective first on that collaboration and cooperation, because we are talking within the private sector, we are talking between the private sector and enforcement authorities, we're talking about intermediaries, we're talking about everybody. Charles, how well do you think that cooperation is working now in this area? And could more be done? What would you like to see? Do you feel as a business that this conversation is happening in the way that it should?
Certainly the cooperation is starting, which is great, that we are having this conversation, that there's an understanding of what we need in order to kind of unblock some of the potential of these technologies. I think there is, IP rights holders are understandably very concerned about what is happening. There probably needs to be a shift potentially from a blame game into essentially a solution-oriented approach that has to probably, I think there is an imbalance here between intermediaries certainly understand the problems of IP infringement, and rights holders might not be quite as aware of the challenges for the intermediaries. We need to de-risk the options. It's great having a toolbox, but as I said beforehand, it takes time to afford the toolbox, implement the toolbox, and then it also requires you to have bought the right tool as well. So anything that we can do there and working together, it's not enough to kind of rely on the mere puff of software salesmen saying that this is the silver bullet. These things that we look at music matching software. This is great if it works in a silent room right next to the speaker. As soon as you throw in background noise or so on, the matching detection rates go down to 3%. This is rights holders sometimes kind of talk about this without, like they've read it in a book, without actually seeing the real life application of that. So I think that would be helpful. And then we can really on the way to kind of progressing. And as I said, the next step for us is to have greater visibility of the timings of certain of these, be that TV shows or sports, and that will really help to narrow down our focus and help to solve this problem.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you do have any more questions for our panel, now is the time, because we are moving towards the end. But Matt, on this question of collaboration, cooperation, partnership at all levels, between you and business, between countries and globally, what can we do? What do we need to do to strengthen it?
I think we need to keep up the pressure. I've been involved in this space for quite a few years now, and sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't work well. And a lot of the time that comes down to the relationships involved. In my experience, when you get people round the table and they have those honest conversations, it can take a long time to build relationships, especially between industries that have traditionally had a slightly adversarial relationship. And really, it's not until they spend some time with each other, understand the commercial pressures that each other are facing, they understand how well they can cooperate and how it can be mutually beneficial. So it's a slow burn. It takes time to make this stuff happen. So we have to keep up the pressure. Government can facilitate that sometimes, although a lot of the best cooperation comes when government isn't in the room. People can be more agile, as long as we make sure we remove any barriers that are stopping people, and that means making
so you see your role as the convener, as it were, and the remover of obstacles, rather than as the catalyst for what then happens.
Ideally, yes. Voluntary collaboration between businesses is much quicker. It's more agile. They know what they're doing in a way that government doesn't. In this space, they're the experts in the technology and in the business space that they're in. So if they can work together to fix problems, they can do it in half the time we can. So much better for us to just give them a conference room and supply the biscuits, really.
Michael, conference room and biscuits, or do they need to do more?
No, I agree with Matt, and we actually, Nordic Content Protection is actually an example of that, where even though we have competition between the television broadcasters and right holders, they acknowledged several years ago that if there's one thing that they can stand together on, it's the fight against piracy, and that's where our organization was born. But I would also mention that from a private enforcement organization, and then we have very good relations with both prosecution level and law enforcement and investigation level. But it does come down to sometimes to who you're able to actually call, to be invited to sometimes provide them with new knowledge, but also sometimes to be able to hand off some of the data that you might be sitting on to make it work. And we could wish for the international police units, for example, Interpol and Europol, to be more inviting and to be more open to private partners that might not ask anything of them, but want to contribute with data and intelligence.
Could I just ask on that point about data, because we haven't talked about it, and I just wanted to touch on it briefly before we go, particularly in terms of when we're talking about this exchange of data, exchanges of information that are so crucial, but we also have this issue of the balance between realizing data's potential and the issues about data protection and respect for fundamental rights and so on. Michael, is that a quandary? Is that a challenge, do you think, in this area? And if so, briefly, she said, for the $64 million question, briefly, how do we deal with it?
Well, we deal. It is a problem, because you will sometimes, face a closed door based on, we don't know what it is you're offering, and there might be certain details within your intelligence set that we cannot store, and simply it could be a question of what can you store, because we know that you're dealing with this on a global scale, and we probably are able to open your eyes on certain individuals or certain crime groups So it's a problem if you don't accept this data that we created doing what we do. So there has to be a dialogue for data to be able to flow.
Matt, in a minute, if you would, on this question of data sharing, privacy, this balance that we're trying to strike.
I can be quicker than a minute. Yes, there has to be a balance, but there's no right to privacy if you're undertaking criminal activity. All the data protection laws are clear on that. So where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you very much. And before we close, we have just a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to come back to the European Commission's planned toolbox. This is the toolbox against counterfeiting, due for to be published next year. Our discussions here are feeding in to the deliberations on what it needs to contain. You talked about the toolbox of technologies. Here we're talking about the toolbox of tools to fight counterfeiting and IP enforcement more broadly. For each of you, most important element you think that toolbox needs to contain, excepting, I know, Matt, the country you know best, not part of that toolbox anymore, but in a broad sense, what for you, each of you, is the most important element? And I'm going to go this time, I think I started with Charles last time. I'm going to start Michael, then Matt, and I'm going to give Charles the industry the last word. Most important element for inclusion, 1 minute each. Michael.
All right, so I have this long list. No, if I were to point at one thing, I would love for the toolbox to have an element of being proactive, because we're talking about new technologies, and it would be a very welcome addition if there were some kind of establishment of a proactive viewing, a forward viewing entity that would be perhaps leaning against some of the EU IPO expert groups that actually does this and discusses new technology and potential impact and brainstorms on it, but just so that we don't lag that far behind. So right now, for example, we're seeing potentially distributed website distributed hosting, so they won't be hosted on just one server.
Okay.
Let's try to look at that, for example, because that might become a problem going forward. So
thank you very much. Matt.
So for me, the theme I keep coming back to, I think the most important thing this toolbox could achieve is to embed that sense of shared collective responsibility between rights holders, intermediaries, enforcers, and others in the chain. We talk about the law being drafted in a technologically neutral way sometimes, but we need collaboration and relationships that are also technology neutral and that span different subject matter areas and different business areas. If we've got those resilient relationships in place, then it doesn't matter what tomorrow's new invention is, we can deal with it and make the most of it together.
Oh, what an upbeat note. Thank you very much, Charles.
We're trying to solve for a moving target here. So I think it needs to be kind of constantly updated on a certain cadence, which will be able to shift. So, and I would say potentially a 6-month cadence might be correct. We also want granularity and specificity, because this essentially de-risks the options for industry. They can, here we essentially want government to pick a champion. Then we can choose it, then we can implement, we can build and plan and budget on the back of that. And that will help certainly industry.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all three of you. Thank you also to Mark for your inputs to a great discussion. Lots of opportunities, but enormous challenges ahead. We're going to take a 30-minute break now, and then you will go back into breakout sessions. Breakout session 4, how can blockchain technology be used to combat counterfeits? Breakout session 5 on international trade, transport and parcels with a maritime angle, and breakout session 6 on domain names. We mentioned it earlier, new policies and initiatives to combat fraudulent behavior using domain names. Before you go to grab your coffee, can you go back to the main hall, click on the breakout totem pole? You will be directed to the breakout session you registered for. Just enter the password and you're in. And just to warn you, at the end of your breakout, when the time is up, the session will end automatically. The chair of the session has no control over that. You go back to the main hall, click on plenary, and then click on the play button in the middle of our virtual stage. And if you need any help, please contact our wonderful technical team via the chat, and they will do their best to assess you. Thank you again, panel. The audience can't thank you. in this virtual world. So let me do it on their behalf. Great discussion, lots more to talk about. Wish we had twice the time. Thank you very much. And I'll see everyone back here after the breakouts for a little bit of a summary, a little bit of a discussion about how you got on and some closing speeches. Thank you very much indeed. So, welcome back to our final session of this two-day summit. We're going to, in a moment, have a feedback session. Just hear a little bit about how you got on in your discussions from the chairs of the breakouts. Then we're going to get a consumer point of view and then some closing speeches. So, joining me now are the chairs of those sessions. From the session on blockchain, we have with us Erling Vestergaard, IP enforcement expert at the Observatory of the EU IPO. Hello, Erling, great to have you with us. On trade, session 5, Agatha Gerber, Deputy Head of Unit in DG Trade in the European Commission. And session 6, domain names, Alexandra Posch, Deputy Director of the Observatory at the EU IPO. A very warm welcome to you all. Let's dive straight in because we only have about 12-13 minutes and I'm sure your discussions were incredibly rich. Erling, in terms of the challenges, and we talked about blockchain a bit in our panel before the breakouts, what did people see as the key challenges in this area?
First of all, when we're talking about blockchain, we're talking about digitized tokens that can be very securely operated, transferred in a blockchain environment. But when we're talking about anti-counterfeiting, we need to connect to a physical product. So the connection between the physical product and the token, the non-fungible token, or the digital twin, or whatever we call it, that is one of the challenges. And that can only be overcome, I think, well, some of the points in the panel, by the application of other technologies in combination with blockchain technology. Blockchain technology will provide no solutions in itself. It is only through the combination with other technologies that a solution can come. Another obstacle is cost. Traditionally, some of the general purpose blockchains have been quite expensive to do transactions on. But some of the panelists indicated that if we are moving more to application-specific blockchains, we will be able to see a lowering of the transaction cost. So I think cost is very important, maybe not for luxury products, but when we're coming to fast-moving consumer goods, that is really, really important. But the biggest obstacle is creating trust in sharing information and to securing the information and making sure that that sensitive, sometimes sensitive information do not fall into the wrong hands. And again, here, a number of technological solutions, because we are in a cryptographic environment, are being developed and can be applied.
Perhaps we could talk
so
about
I think the conclusion was, yes, there are obstacles, but the potential is also there.
Thank you. I'd like to hear what was suggested in terms of realizing that potential in a bit more detail in a moment. But Agatha, in terms of your session on trade, key challenges that speakers talked about?
Yes, and first of all, I would like to thank very much the speakers because we have run out of time and I have not managed to thank the panelists and all the participants, so thank you very much. Well, in our session on maritime transport, what was identified as a core problem is how difficult it is for authorities and stakeholders to identify illicit goods, taking into account the huge volume of goods which are shipped by sea transport. So often these illicit goods are of course falsely declared, and what panelists indicated is that there is lack of resources for example, with customs authorities, and lack of targeted risk profiling in exporting and importing countries, and that this is at the source of this problem. The other very, very closely related bottleneck, which was identified by the panelists, and this came from all the panelists in a very, very clear manner, is the problem of sharing of information amongst the relevant stakeholders. And that includes customs, that includes other relevant authorities, carriers, freight forwarders, brand owners, so everybody along the supply chain. It was also mentioned that cooperation with e-commerce platforms is not always seamless, and this could be improved. And that is especially crucial when it comes to small parcels. And also, it was mentioned that because of how the networks, the illicit networks operate, and how they shift ports, how they shift countries for entrance and so on, but the enforcement authorities of different countries also could cooperate better, and that there is space for improvement. So these were the most important challenges.
Thank you. And that theme of cooperation, of course, the leitmotif of all our discussions, and very interesting there, that sharing of information coming through from both your sessions as a key challenge. Alexandra, domain names, again, we touched on this in our panel this morning. What were the key challenges in this area?
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, certainly in the domain name area, the key challenges that everybody could agree on was the access and the accuracy of registrant data. So, of course, in the access to registrant data, the question of who is and how much is available came up again, as it has already during yesterday's sessions. And the accuracy was also highlighted, because another point and challenge that was mentioned was the importance of trying to identify potentially abusive domain names as early as possible. So we're talking ideally pre going online, going live on the internet. And of course, that is a challenge. We heard about some good practices. Another challenge identified was, how can we spread these good practices to other players, so to more registries, to the registrants? And certainly all of this, as a challenge mentioned, especially then from the brand owner side, are the partially very inventive business models used by infringers, such as using domain names, re-registered domain names that were previously used for something else entirely, to dupe people into going onto the site and buying products. And just this mere feeling of having to fight the whole time. I think the point there was, if we let up, we think they would just all come back and we'd have this mega problem again. So these, I think, in a nutshell, were the main challenges.
Thank you. And let me stay with you, Alexandra, on what we do about how do we meet those challenges. You said there were some good practices that were shared, and one of the challenges was to spread them. What sort of things, what sort of ideas, what sort of experiences did you hear about?
Well, certainly we heard about, because we had one of the panelists from a registry, from .eu, and they told us what .eu was doing in this space. And it's essentially, it's a fight on all fronts. So you have the pre-registration part, where a tool has been developed to essentially identify potentially abusive domain names that are then checked manually, and essentially trying to catch them before they go live on the internet. Then there is detection. So if anything slips through the net, and once it's registered, you do this again. You set the automated tool and you try to get rid of those domains there. And then also there's the point of the follow-up. So then follow up in cooperation with law enforcement to actually get to the root of this. So not just remove, but actually follow through and try and identify the bad players.
Thank you very much. Agata, you talked obviously lack of resources. The priority for action there is more resource. But beyond that, what sort of priorities did people have to address these issues about risk profiling, the sharing of information, and that cooperation with platforms that, as you said, is not always seamless?
Yeah, I think that but one thing that came through for the discussion was that one of the priorities is to implement preventive measures that would be based on due diligence and risk profiling. That could help customs to work more efficiently, and that would be because this kind of preventive measures would happen at the intermediaries level. So intermediaries could share the information and then provide customs with the information. What was shown here was that there is an advantage on this side, because intermediaries can connect from different countries, and as opposed to customs that of course work in a specific market. What panelists said that what would be needed here would be an electronic database targeted risk profiling that would be needed. So data that is really included in some kind of electronic platform where let's say bad actors can be flagged, and this goes around the whole supply chain, and then shippers and other other actors in the supply chain are basically alerted to that. And of course, what is very closely linked to this is a platform to foster this connection between all relevant stakeholders around along the supply chain. So that indeed is the most important issue.
Thank you very much indeed. And Erling, you highlighted no solution in itself, it only in combination. Priorities for action to make sure those combinations can happen, to address the cost issues, the sharing of information.
I think there was one theme that went across the speakers, and that is we need to take small steps, not be over ambitious, but be realistic. Test if the solutions work and build on that and expand the solution. But be realistic in the approach from the beginning. We are talking about a new technology with enormous challenges in relation to, as you mentioned, the cost of transactions, the scalability. When we're looking at all products in the world, the number of transactions are humongous. So we need to be realistic and select use cases that can be tested in this technology. And then public-private cooperation is absolutely key. If that doesn't come into play with something that functions practically, then the solutions will have no value in themselves.
Thank you very much. And a final thought from each of you. Agata first this time. In terms of, did you identify, when we come to look at the new EU toolbox against counterfeiting that is planned by the Commission, was there a clear, for you, priority element that needs to be included in that toolbox to address all these issues we've been discussing? Same question to you all, but Agata first.
Well, what came very clearly from all panelists and also participants who raised comments in the discussion is that it is a very complex situation to maritime transport with multiple actors, and the need for sharing information is there, and there needs to be a platform. So that's what was really underlined by all, that there needs to be a platform that brings everyone together. And it was said it is not possible for just industry to create this platform. There has to be a public-private cooperation on this. There was a call on public authorities, whether it's the Commission, whether it's the OECD, to look into this. And OECD Task Force on Countering Illicit Trade could be one of the forum that could provide this kind of platform.
Thank you. So a very concrete suggestion. Thank you so much, Agata. Erling, was there one clear message?
Oh, well, I think it's the interoperability issue is absolutely clear. And I think the initiative that has been taken by the EU IPO to start building a functioning blockchain for the rights themselves, what we call IP register on blockchain, I think is a fantastic first step that we can build on to create not only IP, but smart IP, where we connect the registration of the IP to the enforcement of the IP. If we link those two things together, we are on a very good track.
Thank you very much indeed. Alexandra, key priorities, something clear that came out?
Yes, indeed. Of course, it goes, it's sort of in direction of the toolbox, but it goes beyond that. And that is really the access to the registrant data, an access system to registrant data that is working. So it's a much larger issue that's at stake there. But if we specifically look at the angle of the toolbox also, I think we can say joined up of the players. So of law enforcement, for example, but worldwide, global, very much the idea that this is not just a regional issue. Of course, it's global. So you have to join up all the players and make sure that they act together.
Coming back to the theme that we very much elaborated on, discussed in our first panel yesterday. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you to the speakers in those sessions for your contributions. Although we only got a snapshot here, there were note takers in every session, so everything has been captured. Thank you very much indeed, Erling, Alexandra and Agata. So before we move to our closing session, we're going to get a consumer point of view. And I'm delighted to give the floor to Paulo Fonseca, Head of Legal and Economic Department at DECO, the Portuguese Association for Consumer Protection. Paulo, consumers at the heart of all of this. Great to hear your thoughts. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be here today and discussing this issue, which is, let me just say, for a consumer, this is more like a science fiction situation, because if you ask a consumer about what he knows about intellectual property, he's going to say, I don't know what you're saying. You speak in Portuguese or in another language that I can understand. And to begin with, I would like to just give information about a complaint that I received, that my organization received yesterday, which is very fresh. And it's about a consumer who bought footwear from a very well-known online platform. And he bought some footwear from, I'm going to say the brand, Adidas. And he, instead of receiving the good at home, he received a notification from a lawyer stating that he was buying a counterfeit product and the product is illegal, and he engaged in a criminal situation, that the product now needs to be destroyed immediately and the consumer needs to pay the good to be destroyed. He immediately contacted the trader through the online platform, but the trader was already gone from the platform. So this is an example of situations that we receive here at Deco. And to give the consumer perspective, we can point just a few, to mention some bullets and some situations that I think it's important to understand before raising new ideas in terms of enforcement. The first one is, in fact, that when we are dealing with counterfeit products, and I'm going to talk about copyright protected content later, but when we are dealing about counterfeit products, we are dealing with products that are lower in terms of price. And with the COVID-19 situation, with the pandemic, of course, that many situations are struggling economically, at least here in Portugal. And sometimes for a consumer, it's cheaper to buy a counterfeit product through an online platform than getting access to these essential goods through other platforms. So this is something that is a social issue and it needs to be tackled. And we are beginning to see more and more situations like this. So I would like to raise this point in terms of consumer protection and in terms of consumer perspective. But the main problem that the consumer has is the fact that it's the lack of information and knowledge in terms of in literacy for the consumer to understand if he is buying a counterfeit product, what is a counterfeit product, what is a copyright protected content. He doesn't understand this kind of issues. He doesn't know. This complaint is really the idea of what happens on a daily basis to the consumer when he's buying online. And of course, we are trying to see that some of the problems are related to the lack of regulation in certain areas. And the others, I think we need more ambition, at least at European level, in terms of, for example, geo-blocking. Because if the consumer wants to access some content, sometimes he is blocked by the fact that he can't get the access to this content. And this is happening, for example, we have the Euro in terms of sport, and everyone is trying to get access to see the most of the games. But you know that some of the streaming services block sometimes the consumer to get access to these services. So the consumer tries to go through other ways because he's trying to get access, and he is blocked by the geo-blocking situation, and it's a fact. And the other, it's the online platforms, and I'm talking about marketplace. This is something that is challenging us, and we are very concerned about the situation. What we see is that more and more we are seeing the emergence of new online platforms without no liability, and having no liability for the consumer in terms of a situation of non-compliance, and consumers are buying counterfeit products thinking that they are buying the genuine products, and then the consumers most of the time receive this kind of message. So I think that one of the main ideas that I want to express is the fact that we need to tackle these online platforms and marketplaces. I think that it's important, and we are trying to engage at national level our political deciders in order to create a new regulation for marketplaces, making them as co-liable as the sellers, so that they can have a new responsibility in terms to seeing what kind of products that are being sold through their platforms. And of course, for the consumer, there is also problems. If a consumer gets access to a copyright protected content, sometimes it is a gate for problems of cybersecurity, because sometimes it's the only way that hackers can enter into your computer, into a smartphone, and get access to it. And this is really a problem for consumers. And also, in talking about even about these online platforms, it's also a problem, and it's becoming more and more frequent, a problem of safety and health for consumers. Because if you look into cosmetics, I know that most of you are aware of this, but we have received some complaints about it, situations in which the consumer buys some kind of product, a cosmetic, and ends with a problem in hospital because it is a counterfeit product. And of course, the idea and the rules about when the products produced are completely different. And just to give you an idea of what could be done, because what we see is that there are problems of economic problems, like I have raised, social problems, but also problems regarding literacy. And that is something that my organization has tried over the years to bring consumers. It is literacy, and for the consumer to understand or deconstruct the concept of industrial property, of intellectual property, understanding if a product is counterfeit or not, the consequences of buying these kind of products. Of course, we have magazines in which we test products. And of course, we also have some projects. Some have been financed by the UIPO, which is very good. One of them, it's a Brain Ideas, which is a local school project in which we try to engage students and teachers to understand the consequences regarding intellectual property and, of course, buying a counterfeit product. So it's a very good idea to begin with the schools and try to engage consumers on this situation. Also, we have created a specific website for consumers so that the consumers could understand and distinguish a counterfeit product from a genuine. It's a basic website regarding rules buying online, because when we talk about these kind of issues, it's important to realize that in terms of digital transition, consumers have a vulnerability by default. We cannot talk about segments of consumers that are more vulnerable than others. We have vulnerability by default. And sometimes it's very, and in terms of intellectual property and industrial property, of course, this is what the major issues come regarding the buying counterfeit products. We also have, I think that's a very good project with an organic e-commerce association in Portugal, and also another association regarding websites. We have created a trust seal, and it is a trust seal for companies. If the company complies with the kind of rules, with its code of conduct, and in its code of conduct, there are specific rules regarding intellectual property, regarding counterfeit products, and if the company complies with these requirements, he can have this trust seal, which has this trust seal is of course with the e-commerce association and the consumer organization, and it's a way to have more transparency in terms of the e-commerce in terms of electronic market, and of course even for consumers to have more trust when they are buying a product. But we are trying to talk about enforcement and solutions. And it's very difficult to talk about enforcement when, I should say, it's very easy to open a website and it's easier to close this website and disappear. And when we talk about consumer problems, we talk about this, that the consumer is buying some product from a website and he thinks that he's buying from a specific brand. Well, he's not, and he's buying from an illegal trader, and this trader is going to disappear in the next days, and the consumer cannot do anything. We had this good example a few years ago. Samsonite discovered that there was some traders that they were buying this counterfeit luggage and other products from this brand, and the Samsonite contacted us in order to provide us an alert so that we can contact consumers and disseminate information about this problem of the consumer buying a counterfeit product. And this gives us an idea. And I think I have this dream. I think like Martin Luther King, but I have this dream for the enforcement in terms of intellectual and industrial property, which would be very interesting if we could join forces and we could create a multi-stakeholder platform with a very specific flow, joining forces with traders, consumer organizations, and consumer authorities and other authorities. Imagine a situation in which the consumer, the trader, even the authority could raise an alert of a specific website that was selling, for example, counterfeit products, and we could disseminate this alert through consumers, through traders, in order to, it's a kind of RAPEX system that we already have for safety products. But we could raise this kind of multi-stakeholder platform that we can try to solve these issues and to act immediately. Because sometimes the problem is when you receive the information, when you try to act, it's late for you to, you cannot get the consumer to be compensated, and the damage has already been done, and it's very difficult to repair it. So I think it could be very interesting if we could join forces in order to create this platform. I think that the European Commission can have a very good role on this, and try to sit down consumer organizations, trader associations, traders, authorities, putting them join forces together to create something that could create a flow in terms of alerts and acting quickly. And then I think that we need to incentivize the dissemination of awareness campaigns. As I said in the beginning, if the consumer thinks that intellectual property is a situation of science fiction, we need to deconstruct to the consumer, say, no, this is a reality, and you have to see the issues, the problems that you have if you're buying a counterfeit product, if you're getting access to a copyright protected content, for example. So you need to see the risks, not only for you in terms of environmental risks for traders, risks in terms of labor. So I think this is something that we need to focus more. And of course, there are some studies, I've seen lot of studies regarding the counterfeit goods, intellectual property, but I have seen few studies regarding what leads the consumers to purchase goods and access counterfeit goods and access protected content. Sometimes you're going to see that the consumer is not trying to engage in a criminal activity. He's only trying to get a cheaper product or a product according to his own capacities and his own needs. So I think that we need to conduct this kind of study. I think it's very important.
I need you to wrap up now.
Okay, only just one last idea, and also understanding the consumer behavior when he's buying online. I think it's very linked to the previous study that I mentioned. I think we need to sit down, and I think consumer organizations could play a very good role, because we receive consumers every day. We understand the consumer behavior. We are a partner for you. We can try to talk with you because we see the consumer perspective, and sometimes it's very interesting to discuss with traders and even with authorities in order to engage into something that could lead to a kind or a different market for consumers. I'm not trying to solve this. I'm not going to solve this problem. It's just one specific solution.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Thank you for lots of great ideas there. And as you say, at the heart of it all, that joining forces together, we can do this. And indeed, if we don't join forces, we can't. That message that's come through so clearly, and putting consumers at the heart of all this, absolutely crucial. Thank you very much indeed. Very grateful to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of 2 days of very rich discussion. But before we close, we're going to hear some short closing speeches by people in the hot seat. So in this final session, as I say, we are going to hear a number of closing speeches. We are expecting Iban Garcia del Blanco MEP to join us, Vice Chair of the European Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee. We have with us Ana Bandeira, President of the Directive Council of the Portuguese Institute of Industrial Property. We have Vojko Toman, Director of the Slovenian Intellectual Property Office. Of course, Portugal in the presidency hot seat now, Slovenia taking over shortly. And we're also going to hear from the European Commissioner for the Internal Market, Thierry Breton. But Ana Bandeira, if I could come to you first for your thoughts at the end of two very rich, very intense days of discussion.
Of course, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It's a great honor to be here today at the 4th edition of the International IP Enforcement Summit, and a great privilege to give one of the closing addresses. First, allow me to congratulate and thank the Swedish Intellectual Property Office, the European Commission, and the EU IPO for organizing this exceptional event. It has been a pleasure to participate in this summit that has brought together Europe's decision makers, enforcement authorities, multinational companies, and several other stakeholders. I would also like to congratulate all speakers whose expertise of the subjects discussed provide us with a better understanding of the fight against counterfeiting and piracy. During these 2 days, we have discussed different ways to improve the protection and enforcement of IPRs in the EU and worldwide. Truly, it's a battle worth fighting, since it will contribute for a more sustainable and fair future for all of us. Today, my mission is to speak as the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. In this sense, I would like to give you an overview of the main achievements of the Portuguese presidency in the field of IP. First, I will start with a focus on IP enforcement. Counterfeiting is a phenomenon that harms competition and severely distorts the market laws. In addition to the terrible effects on the economy, counterfeiting has dangerous effects on the environment and on the health of consumers. As we know, a joint study from EU IPO and the OECD estimated that counterfeited products represent 6.8% of European Union imports, worth 121 billion euros, and impacts every sector, from cosmetic and toys, wine and beverages, electronics and clothing, to pesticides and pharmaceutical products. Due to the importance of enforcement of IP rights and the anti-counterfeiting fight, Portugal has defined this as a priority for its presidency of the EU Council. Portugal was committed to putting IPR infringements, namely counterfeiting, on the impacts priority list alongside other types of crime perpetrated by organized crime. So it's a great joy and pride for us to see the IP crime, counterfeiting of goods and currency in the Council conclusions that set the EU priorities for the fight against serious and organized crime for impact 2022-2025. During our presidency, we encourage further actions in the fight against IP infringement, including counterfeiting and piracy, and urge for it to be on the priorities of all relevant Union policies. Also addressed was the progress on the non-legislative agenda announced by the Commission in the Action Plan, including the upcoming EU Toolbox Against Counterfeiting. Moving on, I would like to share with you a quick overview of the Council conclusions on industrial property policy, which were approved by the Council of the EU on the 18th June. In a nutshell, they address the role of IP in helping to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and outline the importance of IP for SMEs and their economic recovery, as well as for green and digital transition. The text calls also for strengthening the support for European SMEs and the protection and valorization of SMEs' IP rights and trade secrets as an essential factor for their competitiveness, innovation, value generation, and sustainability. Regarding COVID-19 pandemics, a close cooperation among all relevant public and private actors is considered to be crucial for rapidly increasing production capacities and worldwide supply of COVID-19 vaccines. Relying on voluntary solutions for the sharing of IP, know-how, and data is seen as a promising way to ensure worldwide access to critical products for diagnosing, treating, and preventing COVID-19. Concerning IP infringements, further actions are encouraged, in particular against counterfeiting and piracy. Finally, the conclusions welcome the Commission's IP action plan of 25 November 2020 and call for the presentation of the legislative initiatives announced, in particular the package reviewing the legal framework on industrial design protection, rendering it more accessible for SMEs, and recalls that it stands ready to consider a sui generis geographical indication protection system of non-agricultural products based on a true impact assessment of its potential costs and benefits. Still during our presidency, the following online events were organized. On February 11th, the high-level conference on digital transition and its connection with intellectual property. On April 26th, on the occasion of the World Intellectual Property Day, the webinar regarding green technologies. On May 13th, a geographical indications webinar about agri and non-agri GIs. On May 20th, a webinar for SMEs. And we consider that the Portuguese presidency did its best to accommodate every single member state's perspectives and opinions, aiming to achieve a common understanding that would reflect the European Union as a whole. We would like to wish Slovenia, our last partner in the trio, a very productive and successful presidency, and to say that you can count on Portugal, for we will continue after our presidency to work actively to promote IP, not only for Europe's recovery, but also for its future. Now, to conclude, I return to the topic of the fight against counterfeiting that has brought us here together and that has been intensively debated in the last 2 days. Finally, I would like to remind you all and stress the importance of the consumer's education on the value of IP and to the dangers of them and damages of counterfeiting. It is crucial to change mentalities of the consumers, who we are all. And this is done through education and awareness. Hence, we are all responsible, and it is in our hands to make the difference. The fight against counterfeiting is a never-ending process. Cooperation and collaboration is a key in this process. This is a long path for us to travel down. Let's continue to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna, and thank you for all your work during the presidency on these issues and for your passion and commitment to the cause. I'm very grateful to you. We're going to hear in a little while from Slovenia. You mentioned them taking over the presidency baton. But before that, I'm delighted to see that Iban Garcia del Blanco, MEP, who is Vice Chair of the European Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee, otherwise known as Jury, has joined us. So Iban, a very warm welcome, and over to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning, and my apologies because I had a medical appointment and it was in a late, and I had no other option. So I'm so sorry, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this international summit of intellectual property rights enforcement. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. As a member of the European Parliament, as you said, as Vice Chair of Committee of Legal Affairs, we are responsible of intellectual property rights like a competency. I will briefly reflect in my intervention to work that the work that we are currently developing in the European Parliament, the most recent and ongoing work as relates to intellectual property and which relates to intellectual property rights enforcement. Firstly, allow me to remind the extraordinary importance of intellectual property rights for sustainability of our European model and values. The European project, based on democratic values and the consolidation of peace, is also based on a common European cultural spirit linked to the understanding of a common European legacy that has in the protection of intellectual property rights one of its foundations. Today, we are at the crossroad of new challenges and opportunities. Ahead of us, a digital and green transition and the effects of the lockdown and the coronavirus crisis that still we have to leave behind. Yet, intellectual property rights demonstrates the importance to build in European strengths and to contribute to the EU economic and social recovery. In February this year, a joint study published by EUIPO and the EPO analyzing the performance of companies in the European Union with regard to their ownership of intellectual property rights, and concludes that intellectual property rights intensive industries currently account for almost 45% of Europe's GDP and directly contribute to the creation of almost 30% of all jobs. Moreover, wages paid by intellectual property rights owners are on average 20% higher, and those percentages are ever higher in the case of SMEs. That is, for me, that was so notable. The SMEs that use intellectual property rights grows quite quicker and more resilient to economic than towns, and therefore the labor market linked to those companies more stable and secure and enjoys better working conditions. However, only 9% of European SMEs lies on intellectual property rights. They are unaware of their use and insecure of the protection it provides. Raising awareness and ensuring a better enforcement of intellectual property rights is essential to help our SMEs and consequently our own European society welfare and growth. In the European Parliament, we are working in order to create a more resilient, sustainable and social recovery. Industries that make intensive use of intellectual property rights play an essential role in the EU economy and offer good and sustainable jobs to society. We have the duty to protect them. We are now working to deliver our opinion on the IP action plan that establishes a holistic approach in the field of intellectual property rights to adjust it to the digital era and the use of new technologies to support better European innovation and research and to help companies, in particular SMEs, to care and better protect their creations. We are also working in establishing a position regarding the Digital Services Act package announced by the Commission in December 2020, with the intention to upgrade the rules governing all digital services with a comprehensive and robust legal framework for accountability, transparency and regulatory oversight on intermediary services to counter all types of illegal content, products and services, including IP infringing activities. The DSA should be understood without prejudice of specific rules already in place. For me, this is especially important. in particular the directive on copyright in the digital single market. In this regard, most member states have still to implement the directive, and we hope they will do so to allow a proper enforcement of copyright and related rights in the online world. Regarding DSA, the European Parliament will call for more liability and responsibility on intermediaries, imposing safeguards and clarifying that measures to identify illegal content are accurate, fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory. Also, we are studying to establish some obligations to prevent the re-uploading of an illegal content that has been taken down, and to include within the provision of trusted flaggers IP owners. These proposals will serve to establish several measures to boost innovation, support creativity, and provide enforcement tools to tackle IPR infringements, in particular counterfeiting and piracy, reinforcing the exchange of information between law enforcement authorities, IP owners, and online intermediaries. In this regard, I'm convinced that the EUIPO and its observatory will have a strong role to play, and I encourage its essential work and ongoing projects, in particular, to leverage the EUIPO strategic project on enhancing IP protection on e-commerce marketplaces and its IP enforcement portal, from which the observatory has already developed a secure system supporting standardized multilingual communications between IP owners and law enforcement authorities across the European Union, to further develop this information tool in order to include in all kinds of intermediaries. In second place, to provide expertise on risk analysis and mitigation of risks, especially on how to best contribute to the task of the forthcoming European Board for Digital Services. In the third place, to develop the observatory training capacities, both to law enforcement authorities and with compliance officers appointed by large online platforms. Finally, let me congratulate the EUIPO for the launching of the new Out of Commerce Works portal in implementation of the copyright directive. It is important to improve legal ways of making available protected works. And to conclude, we have to ensure that 416,000 jobs that are annually destroyed in Europe due to IPR infringements, and we show all the necessary tools to avoid these direct economic and employment losses. The use of new technologies, in particular artificial intelligence and blockchain, should contribute to better enforcement of IP rights. In this regard, I'm very curious to follow the results of the study on the impact of artificial intelligence on the infringement and enforcement of copyright and designs currently being carried out by EUIPO in collaboration with UNICRI. We need to ensure better cooperation from all authorities at levels, national, European, and international level. Better judicial training and judicial cooperation is also needed, in particular regarding cross-border infringements. And we must not forget the need to raise awareness and to educate our citizens in the importance of respecting IP rights. In this regard, I think we are advancing, we are coming forward. Fair and effective enforcement of IPR is key to promote investment in innovation, to support creativity, and to contribute to the sustainable social and economic recovery of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ivan, and thank you for not giving up on us despite the challenges you faced this morning. So outlining there the enormous amount of work that is being done in this area, those key next steps as you saw them, lots to build on in the conversations that are to come in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you so much for being with us. We now turn, Anna mentioned the Slovenian presidency earlier, and I'm now delighted to give the floor to Vojko Toman, who is director of the Slovenian Intellectual Property Office, to talk to us about the plans under your time in the hot seat. Over to you, Vojko.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me first greet you and warmly thank you for all contributions and fruitful discussion. Intellectual property rights are the cornerstones of today's European Union economy. Let me repeat what was already said by some speakers before me. The industries that intensively use IP rights contribute nearly 30% of employment and almost 45% to GDP in the EU. These numbers show the importance of IP rights for our economies. At no time in history has the role of intellectual property and supporting human endeavor been quite as apparent as it is now. For over a year, much of humanity has sheltered, masked, and distanced at incalculable cost our economy and at immeasurable cost to our emotional well-being. During this trying time, our spirits were lifted by literature, music, movies, and other cultural content created by authors of all winds. Groundbreaking innovation made economically viable by IP now allows for cautious optimism that this ordeal might soon be behind us. On the 1st of July, Slovenia will take over the presidency of the Council of the EU. I want to take this opportunity to thank our trio predecessors, the German presidency and most recently, the Portuguese presidency for their hard work and determination in the field of intellectual property during the past year. Congratulations for an excellent job. Slovenia's main priority during the presidency of the Council of the EU will be the Union's resilience to crisis, the debate on the EU's strategic autonomy, and the recovery of the European economy based on the digital and green transition. As part of the EU's resilience to crisis, Slovenia will pay particular attention to preparedness for the pandemics. We will focus on the building of the European Health Union and strengthening the EU's capacity to ensure the availability of vaccines, medicines, and medical equipment. Slovenia will also pay due attention to the strengthening of cyber resilience, especially for possible events of large-scale cyber attacks. Regarding the European economic recovery, Slovenian presidency will attach particular importance to the timely adoption and quick implementation of recovery plans. It will stay committed to the green transition and tackle climate change with a view to make as much progress as possible in discussion on the climate energy legislation in order to achieve the EU's more ambitious target of reducing greenhouse gases by 55% by 2030. Taking forward the EU's digital transformation, it will focus on the regulation of digital services and markets, which aim to establish global standards for the regulation of online platforms. Priorities in this area also include ethical and human-centered artificial intelligence. In the field of intellectual property, Slovenia will follow legislative initiatives of the European Commission and will work towards a constructive and inclusive discussion on the legislative process. Slovenia is proud to be entrusted with guiding our common efforts in the field of intellectual property. We believe that a well-balanced, effective, and forward-looking system of intellectual property protection will be paramount in our pursuit of economic renewal based on the green and digital transitions. European resilience in the face of this and future crises must be based on our inner strength that is intellectual creation. This is why our presidency will work devotedly to steer our joint efforts in further improving this vital system. As we have heard in the last day, an effective enforcement of IP rights is an important part of a well-functioning IP system. Counterfeiting and piracy is a growing phenomenon on the global level, which has extremely negative and damaging effects on economy and even on safety and health of consumers. We can even calculate the damages our economy suffer. Due to counterfeit products in the EU marketplace, we have direct loss of sale amounting to 50 billion euro and direct losses of more than 400,000 jobs. The report, Global Trade in Fakes, prepared by the OECD and the EU IPO, shows that in 2019, imports of counterfeit and pirated products into the European Union amounted to as much as 119 billion euro, which represents up to 5.8% of EU imports. It is also noted that these results rely on customs user observation and do not include domestically produced and consumed counterfeit and pirated products, nor do they include pirated digital content on the internet. What we are going to do to reduce this damage? I believe we all agree that we should address this issue with all possible means to fight against counterfeiting and piracy. It is important to promote IP system and raise public awareness of the consequences of buying counterfeited and pirated goods. Slovenian Intellectual Property Office, like others, is also raising public awareness on IP rights and launching public campaigns on fight against counterfeiting and piracy. We should use all kinds of preventive measures. We can encourage right holders to use practices and principles which are promoting legal use of IP rights and thereby preventing or diminishing infringements of IP rights. We can also enhance cooperation between right holders, intermediaries, and law enforcement authorities and promote use of tools which enable efficient exchange of data between them. Moreover, not just can, we should do all this and even more. Having said that, despite all taken preventive measures, the illicit trade is growing. We know the scope of damages, not just tens, but hundreds of billions of euros. We know where counterfeit products come from. We have various law enforcement institutions with skilled personnel. They know how to tackle an organized crime, and they know what to do. To reverse the growth curve, we need to strengthen our law enforcement institutions and invest in new employments. We cannot expect improvement if we do not increase capacity and provide for additional training if needed, especially for fight against illicit trade on the internet, for example. Actions speak louder than words. Or a little bit less formal is the idiom that comes to my mind. Put your money where your mouth is. So, let me conclude with my sincere personal wish and hope that in few years we will be able to discuss about positive results for our economies and about successful reduction of illicit trade. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Vojko, and we wish you all the very best with the presidency to come. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are nearly at the end of our summit, but European Commissioner for the Internal Market, Thierry Breton, unfortunately couldn't join us today, but he did want to talk to you, so he sent us a video. So let's hear what he has to say.
Dear Minister, honorable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank for the invitation the Swedish and the European Intellectual Property Offices, co-organizer of the fourth edition of the International Intellectual Property Enforcement Summit. Intellectual property is a key driver for economic growth and long-term recovery. It helps companies valorize their intangible assets. One of the lessons of the COVID-19 crisis is that Europe needs to develop effective rules and tools to secure a more systematic and strategic use of the intellectual property rights. And this is why we presented last year the so-called Intellectual Property Action Plan. It is our blueprint to improve the enforcement of intellectual property rights, boost its uptake by companies, in particular SMEs, and promote a global level playing field. When it comes to the effective enforcement, we have done a lot to protect our consumers and our companies. But more is needed. Counterfeiting and piracy are still thriving, and intellectual property infringers are able to quickly adapt their fraud schemes. We have seen in the last months how fast counterfeit vaccines have spread over the internet, as well as fake test kits, counterfeited masks, and so on. Online piracy is also taking new forms, new infringing models, which directly affect the revenues, for instance, of the creative and sports sectors. In order for Europe to harness this pressing challenge, the Commission has started preparing the groundwork with two key components. First, the Digital Services Act. Stemming from our core European values, the Digital Services Act will rebalance the rights and responsibility of users, intermediary platforms, and also, of course, public authorities. It will introduce a series of new harmonized obligations for digital services, carefully calibrated to their size and their impact also. We will be able to audit these platforms to check they take and the appropriate measure to respect their obligation. It will help create a level playing field, let's say, to better protect consumers against providers of illegal content, including, of course, counterfeiting and piracy. With the DSA, we will therefore have the means to make Internet a safer place for all, with a simple guiding principle. The rules that apply offline should also apply online. The second key component, and a major step forward, is the upcoming EU toolbox against counterfeiting. It will set out a coherent, effective and coordinated action against counterfeiting both online and offline, and will also clarify roles and responsibilities of all actors. It will also build on effective and efficient data sharing. With the use of new technologies, we aim at preventing and detecting intellectual property infringing activities. Most of the actions that we will launch in the context of this EU toolbox could also be relevant to curb piracy. It will take inspiration from industry-led initiatives, in particular the Memorandum of Understanding on the sale of counterfeit goods on the Internet, and facilitated by the Commission. With the toolbox, we aim at providing concrete and practical solutions for all key players, building on a strong and structured cooperation between right holders, intermediaries, and authorities. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of work ahead of us. We'll build on the exchanges of these 2 days. I count on your active involvement in our fight against counterfeiting and piracy. Thank you very much.
Thierry Breton there underlining how much work lies ahead to take all of this, build on these exchanges of the last 2 days and feed them into the development of that toolbox for what he said was coherent, effective and coordinated action against IP infringement on and offline. That brings us to the end of our proceedings. It only remains for me to thank all our speakers over the last 2 days for their very rich and insightful contributions to our discussions. And thank you also to all of you for your suggestions, for your ideas, specifically about what you want to see in that toolbox, but also more widely, how to foster that cooperation at all levels and between all stakeholders that you've all underlined throughout is absolutely essential in order to win this battle. Thank you also for sharing your best practices, your experiences. It's been a great privilege to moderate those discussions. Thank you also to our hosts, to the Swedish Intellectual Property Office, to the European Commission, and to the European Union Intellectual Property Office for hosting us and organizing this event, and to the fabulous tech team behind the scenes who made it all possible. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant rest of the day. Goodbye.